Thank you very much. So first of all, for those of you who are in from out of town, thank you very much for coming to San Jose. No, I do not represent the city of San Jose, but I live about a mile away. And so this is the shortest commute I've ever had to come to a conference. So please, let's have it here again next year. This is great. I'd like to expand on some of the topics that have been discussed this morning. Obviously, I'm more on the technology side, so we'll come at it, a little bit more from that angle, but hopefully reinforce some of the discussion points that have already been brought up in these forums. So, I'm at least a little bit a fan of technology history, and everybody here being in this industry, we tend to look forward a lot. As I like to say, kind of the windshield is a lot bigger than the rearview mirror. But it is useful, I think, sometimes to kind of look back and say, how did we get here? And does that give us any, clues as to, where we might be going and how the future might play out? And if you look back 150 years or so, the telephone, the original Victrola, which drove the concept of recording, the original ENIAC computer, and these combined in various ways to kind of lead us to where we are today, where the telephone, wireless came along with Marconi, and ultimately that gave us portable telephones, and computers came around in terms of personal computers, and all of a sudden this magically merged into the smartphone. We stand here today in 2015. It was only 7 or 8 years ago that all of us were carrying around feature phones, or most of us were at any rate. And yet today, this just seems incomprehensible. Everybody's got a smartphone, of course, and we all benefit from the productivity that brings us. So huge amount of innovation, moving from really application-specific devices that were very useful in our day to kind of converged device that has all this different functionality integrated to it. And so that's been a tremendous achievement in terms of the overall move forward in terms of technology over the years, and has really yielded a lot of benefit to us. But so where does that lead us next? Well, things are actually accelerating, as I think all of us feel this. I certainly feel it in my everyday job. I think most of us do. The industry is actually moving faster and faster, and if that last wave took us 150 years, I think the next wave might take us 15 years, or maybe even less. And as we go to then the next step of, fine, we have smartphones and we have that technology, that wireless, that pervasive wireless technology and ability to reach data from wherever we are and whenever we need it. And that's been a tremendous boon, but now it's being spread. And then we talked about smart cities, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Obviously, this technology is enabling a lot of the business discussions that we're having today about applications and how smart cities can be, cities can become smart and benefit from that. As this spreads across all the different types of devices and vehicles and things that might benefit from this. And of course, tied with that is virtualization and cloud computing, and all of our data is now somewhere else. And so again, the wireless piece of that is the enabling technology that really starts to pull this all together. But similar to the last 150 years, we have a bunch of different wireless technologies, and all of them are useful in their own right, but they do tend to be a little bit silent. They tend to be a little bit application specific. They each came into being because of some specific need. So one of the things that I think is interesting is how, as this technology converges, how the wireless technologies ultimately will likely converge as well in a similar fashion. And I think that's one of the next big challenges and the next big opportunities to make, all this technology actually work together in a very beneficial way. So kind of tied in with that, is the smart cities, which is again a central topic of this Congress. Cities, as VJ and Miguel and others have talked about, have a lot of different challenges. If I look at it today from my perspective, my daughter's in her early 20s. She doesn't, I grew up wanting to live in the suburbs. Maybe it's a US thing, but my parents, it's like, hey, let's get a place in the suburbs. That was the big move. And 30, 40, 50 years ago. My daughter doesn't want to live in the suburbs. She wants to live in the city. And so, there's I think, a move for densification of the cities as young people, in many cases, are moving to the cities. And if you look at other countries, that's certainly a U.S. phenomenon, maybe a European phenomenon as well. But as you look at other countries, China, obviously there's a move even by the government from policy perspective to get people to move into cities because you can much more efficiently deal with the human population in the city. Costs less in terms of carbon footprints, costs less in terms of energy. So a lot of reasons as a global phenomenon that the cities are growing and are growing disproportionately more quickly than other locations. But of course that creates a huge amount of challenges. And so it's great that the technology is coming along at a time that it can really help to streamline and to help make it more efficient in terms of densification of the cities as this global trend continues. And we heard about many of the challenges, and I think the other piece of it, though, the balancing piece, is that as you look at the bringing that technology in, the cities not only have challenges, they also have a lot of valuable assets. City of San Jose, if you just look at 62,000 light poles. That's a tremendous amount of light poles. Obviously, energy consumption and saving energy is a big deal. And I'm sure the mayor and the city council are very concerned about that. But that's also a tremendous opportunity. Of those of us in the wireless business who've done any outdoor deployments, site is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 problem, right? How do you get site act? How do you get power? How do you get backhaul? The city of San Jose has 62,000 light poles. They have 900 traffic lights. Those are locations that they possess, and other cities are obviously similar. And so I think this is starting to drive towards some of the public-private partnership where there's some quid pro quo there in terms of things that can be traded. Al Jenkins has been here and obviously talked about Link NYC, just to hit a couple of interesting current applications that are leveraging some of this. In this case, it's 10,000 former telephone booths. Again, it's all about site acquisition, about power, about backhaul, having those assets, and then trying to figure out useful ways to use them in a public-private partnership where the citizens help bridge the digital divide, help to make free phone calls, many different things you can do, from benefiting the citizens of the city, which is again what it's all about, is ultimately providing services, but also doing so in a way that can be done in concert with the private sector, with different companies that are providing the services and the technology in a way that's mutually beneficial. Another obvious one that I think we all feel the pain of, and those of us who live in cities, is parking. And there are many things going on in terms of real-time availability of parking places with many potential benefits to that, not the least of which is reducing stress for people who are trying to find parking, but just reducing congestion, being more energy efficient, being better for the environment, etc. But again, a lot of that is made possible by having smart meters. And you can have time of day and congestion-based pricing, but again, this is all at some level enabled by these different technologies, wireless technologies, combined with cloud-based technologies. Another interesting one, just to get it out of the U.S. a little bit, is, and I know we have some gentlemen here from Singapore, is the Singapore subway and rail system. Here's using location-based services really to try to understand what the traffic flow of people is in a subway station. And if you look at this is real-time data that came from the subway station, tracking a week of activity as people come in. How long are people standing on the platform? What days are the most crowded? What hours are the most crowded? Assembling these kind of statistics that would enable the city or the transportation authority to actually do a better job of routing trains and providing services more efficiently to the citizens of Singapore. Again, just another interesting application, I think, of some of the technology. But if you look at all this, it's also apparent that there's not one technology that's going to solve it all. going back to the original slide that I had, there's many different wireless technologies, for instance, and obviously, as being part of Ruckus Wireless, that's obviously a focus of ours is, on the wireless technology piece. But, there's many different technologies there that need to be brought together. And so as we look at that, you look at, again, kind of how these things converge from a business perspective, the public and private partnership. You have service providers, you have municipalities, they each bring something to the table. And obviously the service providers bring all the expertise and accumulated skills they have. Municipalities have the assets that can be leveraged here. Again, the result, hopefully, is better services for the people of that city. So, it seems clear from a lot of the trends that are going on and things that have been discussed today that, public and private partnerships are likely the way forward. It's kind of a win-win situation, and in the municipalities, the cities don't have a lot of money, but to the way you can figure out an economic means to bring this together, that's obviously mutually beneficial. But I think one of the other interesting things is, as you start to look at some of the things that are going on, the lines between who's the service provider and who is the municipality or the city, I think some of these things might start to blur over time. Again, multiple radio access technologies are required. Not one thing is really going to do it. Ruckus Wi-Fi, we'd love to have Ruckus Wi-Fi everywhere and have that solve all the problems, but it's probably not the case. It'll solve a lot of problems, some classes of problems, but other technologies will be needed. But then as a city, as you look at operating models, how do I operate when I have multiple radio access networks, and how do I bring all this data together in a meaningful way into a set of analytics or other capabilities to actually understand what's going on and be able to act on it in a way that yields benefits. And then, of course, you also have to deal with kind of the realities of, SIDAC and things like that. But again, this is where the cities can help. The bottom line on this is, it seems that innovative sharing techniques are going to become the norm, have to become the norm. And this is across multiple layers. I'll focus mostly on the radio access layer because, that's what Ruckus does. But, I think if you look at site acquisition again, you can't have 5 radios on the pole. That just doesn't make economic sense. And you can't, and how do you combine these different radio access networks so that they work in a meaningful way? So I think sharing of technologies, sharing of these assets is going to have to become the norm. So just to touch on a few things that we're tracking, and this is not by any means exhaustive, but as you look at some of the access technologies that I think are interesting that are moving forward, in the US, 3.5 gigahertz is very interesting. The FCC is doing some very innovative things there in terms of spectrum sharing. Again, the concept is how do you share spectrum? And I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but the FCC issued a new ruling 6 months ago that is setting up a spectrum sharing system for 150 megahertz of kind of prime real estate, if you will. And pretty much like a DHCP server. When your radio boots up, it'll say, hey, I'm at this location, I need this transmit power, I need 20 megahertz of spectrum, and the spectrum allocation system will ideally take care of that in terms of effectively giving you a temporary lease on that spectrum that you can use in a manner similar to what DHCP does today for IP addresses. And that will actually help to manage the interference. So the interesting piece here as this moves forward, there's a lot of activity around this, is that it kind of blurs the line between licensed and unlicensed. You'll have effectively kind of the performance and lack of interference, kind of the spectral purity, if you will, to some level, particularly if you're in building, but also potentially outside of licensed band. But you'll have kind of the cost and economics model of unlicensed, and this can be done potentially by a city or by a venue or by a business or enterprise. It doesn't have to be a carrier that's allocating the spectrum and utilizing these services. So it starts to blur the line between who is the carrier and who is the customer, as well as between licensed and unlicensed. So if you take this shared spectrum concept, having local private networks, we do it today with Wi-Fi all the time, But extending this to LTE is, a next logical step, where you could have in-building cellular services or local cellular services that are operated, for instance, by the city or operated by an enterprise. And so, it really starts to blur the line and, gives the ability to run private networks that could also have integrations with the, mobile operators for, roaming relationships, et cetera, but have, private devices. And so as you look at IoT, does the city need to necessarily use a publicly available network, or can they use a private network? And is that more economical, and what's more efficient? So I think some of these types of architectures, we'll see evolve. Some of this is already done today, but I think we'll see evolve further, particularly as you get shared spectrum concepts in place. We also talked a little bit, kind of another interesting thread is the LTE and Wi-Fi aggregation. This is really where, the networks really, again, there are many examples of where networks are converging, but this is certainly one where, this is direct integration of LTE and Wi-Fi, where you're tunneling LTE over the top, of Wi-Fi. And, this has a lot of interesting attributes. Right now it's being worked on as part of the Release 13 and the 3GPP. But I think interesting from a business perspective is, as you have a Wi-Fi network and ultimately that is enabled with this capability, obviously you have the benefits of that Wi-Fi network. But additionally, as you look at LWA, you also now will potentially have wholesaling opportunities, where that's an asset that can be used to extend a mobile operator's coverage or capacity to be able to ride over the top of that in a neutral hosted way. So, a city of San Jose or some other entity, even enterprises who have extensive Wi-Fi assets, could utilize those in a way synergistically with the MNOs who have LTE networks to combine these and be able to offer services, potentially from multiple mobile operators over the top of a single converged Wi-Fi network. Again, minimizing the equipment expense as well as site acquisition difficulties. So I'll kind of stop there. I think it's a very interesting time in the industry. There's just a tremendous amount of change in the 25 years I've been in the industry. I've never seen kind of as much dynamic change as going on right now. I think we're in kind of one of those massive step function kind of periods for the next couple of years. Just finished with the quote from the FCC commissioner. This was about 3.5 gigahertz in particular, but I think more broadly, this applies to really the environment we're facing today, where a big blurring of the lines between licensed and unlicensed, who's the carrier and who is the customer. I think there's going to be a lot of innovation over the next several years as these things move forward. Thank you.